Thank everybody. I thought we'd start this morning, and I'll start and introduce myself. And I thought we might just go around the room just a minute for the purposes of the committee. Let everybody introduce themselves and where they're from and how they're going to get started and how they got volunteered or voluntold to participate. Because this is obviously an important issue to TCOLE, and I think it's an important issue to law enforcement. I don't think any of us at the table would be here if we didn't have some kind of story or experience with wellness and mental health and law enforcement. My name is Jimmy Jackson. I'm currently the law enforcement chief deputy for the sheriff's office in Smith County. Our agencies there. Smith County's in Tyler, Texas, and the Pine Trees of East Texas. And our agency has about 400 personnel, and I have about a little over 120 commissioned officers between our patrol and criminal investigations division. I've been there since 2018, and prior to that was with DPS. I spent 25 years with the Highway Patrol division, so had some there. But probably the 5 years at the sheriff's office have had more wellness issues than I did experience. I think it's on the forefront, and I've got several issues that drew me to this committee when I saw it happen. So I'm proud to be here and be a resource.
I'm Bobby Sunley. I work for the AG's office. I entered my 20th year there this month. Before then, I was at Galveston PD, and I started law enforcement in 1994. Was from the old school, brought up of suck it up, buttercup, and have a drink, it'll be okay. Well, been involved in a number of critical incidents in my career, and that did not work well. And so I finally had to seek mental health help, and I went through a program called Post-Critical Incident Seminar that's sponsored by LEMIT, and I'm a peer for the state team now, and I've been a peer since 2017. So I'm over our peer support team as well at the AG's office, and I'm just a proponent for addressing the issues before legal action has to be taken.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Jeff Barnett. I'm the chief of police at the Kyle Police Department, about 15 minutes south of here on 35, so I'm close to home. I'm also the president of the local chiefs association, the Capital Area Law Enforcement Executives Association, so that represents about 40 or so agencies right here in the Austin area. And from a personal experience at our agency, we've certainly had a need for better wellness programs. We're trying the things that most of the agencies in Texas are trying, but it's not good enough. It's not working well enough. We've certainly lost officers and staff members in our organization. That brings about a need for professionals and professional help and a safe route for people to seek assistance. And I know that we can make improvements in the state, and I'm just happy to be part of the team and have the opportunity to be here. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Teresa Jamerson, and I'm a licensed clinical counselor for the last 20 years. So I own a counseling practice in McKinney, and so this was near and dear to my heart because I'm a wife of a 28-year veteran of the Detroit Police Department. So police officers' mental health has always been near and dear to my heart, and I'm just glad to be here and lend any support.
My name is Joseph Florence. I was a police officer with the city of Rockwall for 22 years. I retired as a captain there after accepting a position with the Texas Municipal League Risk Pool. We insure somewhere around 2,800 cities in the state of Texas and have about 800 police departments. We're heavily involved in law enforcement. I'm now a law enforcement consultant, along with one other position. My partner is Chase Stapp from San Marcos, and I'm excited to support law enforcement with the state of Texas as a whole instead of just law enforcement. Thank you.
My name is Dr. Kevin Smith. I'm a clinical psychologist by education and training. I have been doing psychologist work for about 30 years now. The last 15 to 20 years, I've been doing pre-employment and fitness for duty evaluations for a variety of agencies in the Houston area. I'm responsible currently for a large number of the pre-employment and fitness for duty for the Harris County Sheriff's Office, which is one of the largest in the state. And my involvement is, here to help in whatever way I can and add some perspective, because frequently I get to see people on the front end as they come into an agency, but also once a problem where wellness efforts have failed. And there sometimes it's it's now impacting their job. There's some question about whether they can remain police officers or not, so.
Good morning, my name is Alberto Valbuena. I am with Tarrant 911 District. We are a training academy for telecommunicators. Been there about a year as a training coordinator. Prior to that, I was a dispatcher for 16 years. 3 of them here in Texas. The rest were up north in Connecticut. When I found out about this committee, I found it kind of personal. As a telecommunicator in Connecticut, I took a call within my first year that affected me for 13 years. It took me to come to Texas to actually someone to talk to me. The whole time in Connecticut, we're still considered secretarial. So the whole 13 years in Connecticut, it was just kind of like the captain said, suck it up. If you can't deal with it, find another job kind of thing. It took me until I came to Texas and I actually became an instructor that I started talking about the call itself, and that was my way of kind of healing. So I want to make sure that we're here to represent those over 9,000 telecommunicators that we have in the state of Texas to make sure they're also getting all the benefits and all the attention that they need.
My name's TJ Vineyard. I'm over the enforcement division here at TCOL. I've been here for about 3 years. Like Captain Sunley, I started in '94. I went to the Austin Police Academy. I did 23 years in Austin. I retired as a robbery sergeant. I went to Pflugerville, which is one of our suburbs, and worked there for about a year, and then took a little bit of break before I came here. Like all y'all have stories. I have friends that committed suicide. I have friends that drank themselves to death. I have friends that lost their license and lost their career, but now they're sober and they're still with their wife and making amends with their kids, and so I've seen a lot of that. What I see here, the things I see here, I try to talk to staff about some of those experiences so they can kind of connect those pieces together, right? They can understand the impact that we have or the potential impact we could have with some of the things we see. And that's kind of where some of these conversations started that led to this committee.
I'm John Beecham. I'm the general counsel for the agency. I've represented TCOL since 2007, going back to when I was with the Attorney General's office. I look forward to working with each one of you. This is a very worthwhile advisory committee and a very worthwhile charge, and we're glad to have all of you here. Thank you for being here.
I'm Greg Stevens. I'm the executive director with TCOL. I want to first say how much I appreciate you guys being on this committee and volunteering your time. You're all busy professionals. You've all got other things going on with work, with family, with your regular lives. You traveled to get here. What we found is I've been with TCOL now a little over a year, a few days more than a year. I can't say I'm the new guy anymore. I've been reminded of that a couple times this week already. When I came into the role from TCOL's sunset review, what the new legislation dictated is that we would use advisory committees to implement our sunset provisions, and I came in at that time when those committees were already together and solving hard problems, coming up with new model policies, coming up with new rules. I thought that process worked very well. Because it's not bureaucrats in Austin handing out edicts across the state that impact, a small sheriff's office or a small police department in the Rio Grande Valley or up far away as the Panhandle or something like that. It's a good process. And those committees represented people from all the geographic regions, big agencies, small agencies, the state agencies, sheriff's offices, constables, the whole gamet's very diverse groups of people coming together to help us create new methods, new processes, new rules, all of those things. And so as we were doing our work and came across some issues, somebody said, and I don't even remember who suggested, why don't we look at using committees, advisory committees to make these decisions or to help us make these decisions. This is one of 3 topics that we decided to do that with to create these committees. So you're one of 3 committees. And so what you do and what you come up with, what you help us do, will have far-reaching impacts in Texas law enforcement. We're a very big state. We have about 2,800 law enforcement agencies, 119,000 licensees between telecommunicators, jailers, and about 78,000 peace officers. So it's important work, and I appreciate y'all volunteering of your time and sacrificing doing that so that we can make informed decisions, informed processes, and this is a very important thing, as you guys have all said, but as TJ has also mentioned. I've got a long police career and a long military career, and I've seen again, my friends, my colleagues that have killed themselves, taken their own life, one in particular, a very good friend, literally drank himself out of his career at the Lubbock Police Department and then later drank himself to death, lost his family and all of that. So we want to try to get ahead of those problems, figure out what we can do more proactively to make law enforcement better, to improve the lives of our law enforcement personnel across all of the licenses that we hold. And so again, it's important work. Want to appreciate ahead of time the work that you're going to do, and these are the things that make a real difference. So thank you.
My name is Daniel Walker. I'm one of the Assistants General Counsel here at TCOL. In brief, through my career, I've worked at the AG's office, did civil litigation, and as a criminal prosecutor. So I'm looking forward to working with y'all on this committee, especially in light of my time as a prosecutor, working with lots of different law enforcement members and seeing those affected in the wellness area by the criminal justice system and what the exposure there. So looking forward to attempting to help the licensees in the state of Texas alongside y'all. So thank you.
Also Assistant General Counsel Jenny Helbig. I came from the Attorney General's office as well. I'm really excited to work with all of you in bettering standards for law enforcement in the state of Texas. Thank you for being here.
I'm Claudia Guevara. I recently graduated with a Bachelor of Arts in Forensic Psychology at UT. I'm interested in suicide prevention techniques and how PTSD can affect those first responders and ultimately prevent suicide or just issues that might arise while in other critical situations.
Good morning, I'm Iris Martinez. I'm one of the legal assistants here at TCOL.
I'm Gretchen Grigsby. I'm the Director of Government Relations here at TCOL. Y'all have probably all seen my name in your email inbox. So again, thank you all for being here. What I want to really draw attention to is that each of you brings a very unique perspective from your background, your expertise. And so it's really important that each of you be vocal with your experiences and share that, not just, because it can be part of a healing process, but really because it can be helpful to the work that you're doing and to the licensed community that we are all here to serve. So thank you for being here.
I'm Brian Flatt. I work for TMPA. I started my career up in the Texas Panhandle, up in the Amarillo area back in 1990. Two months into my career as a county jailer, somebody tried to kill me in an escape attempt, and so that's how my journey started. So I spent almost 24 years worth, and then I left the Panhandle and came down here to Central Texas to go work for TMPA, and I was the training guy for 10 years, and I traveled the state 200,000+ miles every day, every weekend, pretty much all the time. And one of the things that I found was I ended up coming across a lot of officers that were in crisis, and I'm just there to train people. And at some point, it apparently had always been on my heart. Back in 2019, I went through law enforcement chaplain training with Billy Graham's Evangelistic Association. Then 2 months after that, I got asked to go down and help after the mass shooting in Midland and Odessa. I went through PCIS, not as an actual participant back in 2014, right after I started down here, but PCIS had requested for us to come down and help try to spread the word about PCIS. And during that time, things were talked about and all that kind of good stuff. I was like, nobody knew about this. And still to this day, I still spread the word about PCIS, and I was able to go through EMDR and all of that. I've had the privilege on 2 occasions in 2022 and 2023 to go help with peer support at National Police Week in Washington, D.C. And that is a whole different ballgame just to go do peer support down there. And even to this day, like the chief talked about, there's so many law enforcement licensees across the state, and things are just not good. And so that's why I asked to hopefully be on this committee. I'm now in the Government Affairs Division. This is my first session at the Capitol, so yay me. But anything that I can do, that we can do to help our people and their families, I'm here for that. So thank you.
I'm Leilani Ramos from El Paso, Texas, retired El Paso Police Department. Majority of my career was plainclothes investigations, SWAT patrol instructor. I experienced firsthand of being in an officer-involved shooting, and that ended fatally, and that had a ripple effect on me and my family. And so I know the challenges of speaking up, right? And all of the symptoms and coping mechanisms that, you know, us in police culture tend to lean towards. I was offered to go to a wellness retreat in Florida with Texas 635. And just taking that jump was really hard because I had to be honest with my own stuff. So after I went and really started to unpack my own stuff, work on myself, I enrolled into my master's program, and I'm like, I'm gonna be a therapist for police officers. So now that's what I do. I'm a clinician with Chill Counseling. It's a private practice out of Dallas. Specialties is working with critical incident stress management, post-officer involved shooting, and PTSD. So a constable out of El Paso shared the link. And he was like, hey, check this out. I don't know if it's something you may be interested in. So I read the email and no doubt straight up put in, because that's what I'm doing now. And I know there is a need for it. And I know the firsthand experience of the challenges of navigating through the system of workman's comp, EAP, the trust issues, like all of that. So I'm really happy to be here and to be a part of this.
I'm Ashley Lutke. I'm an officer with the Austin Police Department. I've been there about 15 years. Spent most of my time on patrol. I have to go there after this. I'm also a licensed social worker. So I've done a lot of work with our peer support team, and you know the challenges that come along with that. But it's a unique perspective, being a cop and a social worker at the same time. But it has definitely lent itself to be beneficial when, working with our officers. We've lost a few just even in the last year. And, our critical incidents are obviously rising and stuff. Being involved in one myself, I've walked the walk as well. So I was sent the link as well by somebody in our department, knowing my background and my experiences and things, and it was right up my alley, and I have a passion for wanting officers to be as well as they can be. I currently am at our training academy now for our advanced education unit, and I push out a lot of stress management, burnout classes, peer support classes and things like that, so it's definitely something I'm passionate about.
Thank you. Obviously, TCOL has put together a very diverse group with lots of experience, so I'm excited about the committee, and I've had Gretchen and John and a few people say, this is your committee, dude, and I don't like that. This is our committee. So I've read through this charge today, and what I want to do, TJ's got a presentation he's going to do for the group later that we met yesterday and went through. And before he does that, I had a little vision for our committee, and I want as a group for us to discuss it, because when we talk about how TCOL can assist in wellness, I kind of put that in two packages. And in my career at DPS, like many of you in the room, I had a classmate in my academy that I was very close to that committed suicide, and I was involved in the arrest of my mentor and partner for DWI and watched him lose his career. So I've seen both of those, and what I found interesting in my transition, or challenging in my transition from DPS to the sheriff's office, is in those critical incidents at DPS, we had a staff psychologist, and I was able to call her and say, hey, what do I do here? What are my resources? And I had a peer support team I could grab from all parts of the state, and DPS had a tremendous amount of resources. And it was surprising yesterday visiting with TJ, and don't hold me to these numbers in the presentation, but wasn't it 60% of our agencies in Texas have less than 15 officers in them?
It's 10 or fewer, 60% of them. It's almost 1,700 agencies that have 10 or fewer.
No, and so in my transition to the chief's position at the sheriff's office in the last 6 years or 5.5 years at the sheriff's office, I've had seven deputies involved in line of duty shootings, one killed on a traffic stop by a drunk driver. And all of those critical incidences, I didn't have the resources I had at DPS, so I found it very challenging. So when we talk about what TCOLE can do, after TJ goes to his presentations, I've got kind of like three, and I know we need to be, and I'm gonna defer to the legal group to make sure we don't have any walking meetings or open meetings issues, but
We'll keep you straight.
yeah. I would like to maybe form a couple of subcommittees about some topics that we work on in between our meetings to make our meetings a little more productive. And one of those might be, for example, TCOLE fixed this. I think, Director, y'all did some of this at your last advisory committee, because I don't think this particular issue would happen again. But I had a licensee, to your point, Dr. Smith. We had a fit for duty issue where we had some real concerns about a suicide attempt, and sent a licensee to a psychologist, and one psychologist said that licensee doesn't need to be around a gun. They're at risk for a lethal suicide attempt. And she came back, went to her own psychologist, left our agency, went to her own psychologist, got a clean bill of health 2 days later, went to work for a small agency. And now I think in the new processes with TCOLE, that would not happen. We have flagged that because that licensee ended up employed a month later and wound up in jail. So I think we corrected those issues. So one of the committees I'd like to talk about is maybe when a licensee is involved in a critical, go ahead.
Mr. Jackson, if I may, if we could do the call to order and roll call.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry, go right ahead. Yes, I'm sorry, don't, keep me on track, I gotta hit a call. We got too involved in our topic too quick.
Not a bad thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
Presiding Officer Chief Deputy Jimmy Jackson.
Here.
Assistant Presiding Officer Captain Robert Sunley.
Here.
Brian Flatt.
Here.
Joseph Florence. Chief Jeff Barnett.
Here.
Clinical Director Teresa Jamerson. Senior Officer Ashley Ludke.
Here.
Sheriff Christopher Pounds. Leilani Ramos.
Here.
Dr. Kevin Smith.
Here.
Alberto Valbuena.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. And I guess the next thing on the agenda was those opening remarks, huh? We just skipped your part.
We got the housekeeping.
Yeah. But anyway, if we had those subcommittees that maybe could look into, maybe we'd look into how TCOLE could intervene when a licensee, when there's a notification to TCOLE that, hey, there's a problem. And then the new thought in terms of some of the things all of you have mentioned is maybe there's a possibility of establishing some kind of link or website on TCOLE's website as a resource guide. Where, and from two perspectives, it could be an agency administrator that has a critical incident with an employee, or an employee that's self-reporting and doesn't understand what resources are available to him or his agency. How could they get some help? And then also a resource from an officer perspective, because I don't think we should always look at it from an administrator standpoint. It could be a situation where an officer realizes their partner is at risk for a problem and would like some help. And maybe TCOLE is just a resource guide where somebody could go to where some resources are listed. I know in a couple of our critical incidents, I looked for a peer support group that was outside our agency, because we all know sometimes that peer support is difficult coming from the people you work with every day. And that third party anonymity is good. So we'll look at forming some of those committees, and that was kind of my vision. But during this process, if those committees need to evolve or somebody sees a new issue, I certainly don't want to be I'd like to keep the train on the tracks, and stay within the scope of what TCOLE has asked us to do. But I certainly want to be open for change and explore all the topics we need to explore. We've got TJ can go through that presentation, and then we can discuss some of those committees as a group and who wants to be on them. TJ, do you have anything to add to that, or?
So when we met yesterday, the other two advisory committees we have right now, one of them is developing minimum standards for training coordinators, and the other one is developing job duties and responsibilities for school marshals. Both those are pretty narrow requests, right? They'll know when their product is done, they can present it to the commissioners. This is a lot broader group with a more nebulous concept, right? But this is something that the commissioners have talked about over and over that they want to be a priority for us. And so my conversation with him is I wanted to make sure, I was excited that we created a committee. I was more excited after I talked to you, and then after hearing the background, especially like what you have a very broad perspective, right? You've seen big agencies, small agencies, you've seen the impact. But I want to make sure everybody here kind of understands what we see in what information is available to us, right? And then how we have the ability to operate as a resource. We're not looking to create new programs, right? We just want to better connect those people. I hear people talk about solutions or solving problems. Like, I'm just looking for us to make more effective tools available to officers. And even if it's just that when they log into their MyTCOL, there's something there about suicide prevention that wasn't there before. It's one more opportunity for them to see it. To me, that's a step forward. And so the presentation is going to go over just kind of what's available to us. And the biggest thing I think is to understand the disparity between what's available to officers depending on the size of the agency they're in right now.
And the fitness for duty process we talked about yesterday, I know there's been some changes to it and it's relatively new and some of that. So, and just the small circle I'm in, even in my own HR department, last night after our meeting, TJ, I called some of my own folks and some of my own staff was not completely familiar with some of the new fitness for duty and how that starts. So I'd like to make sure the committee's up to speed on that in your presentation and how that fitness for duty process works. And when you log into MyTCOL, whether you're an administrator or a line or field officer that's dealing with trying to prevent a problem, how can we get some resources and putting that in the MyTCOL link where it's accessible to everyone, I think is beneficial.
There are a lot of recent changes that I'm going to talk about, and I talk fast to begin with, so if I'm talking too fast, let me know, I'll slow down. If you have questions, you can interrupt me or you can make notes because by the time we're done, I may have answered some of them. I know we kept starting to ask questions, then we go to the next slide and we get to kind of what you were talking about yesterday when we went through it. But I think understanding that all of these things that are changing are moving us a direction, but they also provide a lot of opportunities. I've been working with Dr. Smith because there's so many things we've dealt with in Harris County as he's getting on, but there are agencies that aren't even aware of this yet and aren't feeding into it. Iris, can you go ahead and switch over to that PowerPoint? Work on that computer over there. I might have to stand over there. So some of the stats I pulled are from the Texas 2036 report. This was published in late 2022 and was used in the last legislative session. But we worked with the group that created that. And this is what a lot of people don't understand that's really helpful to kind of give them the framework of what we're dealing with. This shows the number of agencies in California, Colorado, Florida, North Carolina, and Washington. All those states combined have 600 fewer agencies than we have in Texas. So we have, at that time, 2,700 agencies. We have almost 2,800 law enforcement agencies in Texas right now, far more than these other states. You see the number of licensees at the bottom. Those are just licensed peace officers. There was about 78,000 in 2022 when they published this. These are the numbers now to the right. So we went from 78,500 officers in 2022 to over 81,000 now. We've got over 24,000 jailers and over 9,000 telecommunicators. So there are a lot of licensees in Texas. One of the things that people don't realize is that we deal with all active licensees. So there are a lot of licensees who are not working for an agency right now, but still have a license. We still get a lot of information. We still have a lot of insight into what they're doing. And so those are still opportunities. Just because they're not with an agency doesn't mean they don't have a license and that we don't have the ability to impact those people. This is what Chief Deputy cited earlier. 60% of the agencies have 10 or fewer appointed peace officers. That's almost 1,700 agencies in Texas. So you can imagine the resources that are available to them, the things that they know and deal with are very different. 75% of the agencies have 25 or fewer appointed peace officers. When I retired from Austin Police Department, I went to Pflugerville, which I thought was a small department. They have 100 peace officers there. That is a large department by most standards. And and they had dramatically different resources. But agencies that have only 10 officers there, not only do they generally have chiefs with less experience on supervision and management, they usually have less in the way of policies, less in the way of equipment. Most of them were trained at different academies. They weren't trained at the same academy, so they have different training and backgrounds. And they don't have the same level of supervision. They work by themselves a lot of times, right? But if somebody is involved in a critical incident, everyone there is directly impacted. Those are almost like their family. Everyone in the agency has that level of impact. They don't have peer support people who don't know them or don't know them as well. So it's a very different problem for those small agencies. I've got some of the bigger agencies down there that we deal with, right? Houston and DPS have over 5,000 peace officers in each agency. Harris County has over 2,000 and they've got more than 3,000 jailers. So the depth of resources there, the way that they deal with their problems and their structure is dramatically different. Not to say that the things we're talking about can't benefit those agencies. I know some of it can, but I just want you to understand that a lot of the people we deal with have very different resources than what we're used to thinking of happens in a police department. These are the types of agencies we deal with. Again, people don't always think of the DA investigators, people who work for a water district police department, like there are people that it wouldn't occur to you to think of as being peace officers or licensees that we deal with. I've got the 911 center highlighted. I'm glad that you're here because that's one of the new things we're dealing with. There are more and more standalone telecommunicator entities, but now that they're divorced from a police department, they're less likely to have a psychologist, peer support, those things in place that generally are associated with the police officers. We know telecommunicators can be impacted the same way, it can have lifelong impact, but right now, by letting them create their own agencies standalone, they don't always have the same level of resources. Where this started for me and what bothered me the most after I've been here for a while is my involvement in what we call E1 cases. We call everything by the form that it's on, right? So the E1 is a form that you send to notify us if a licensee gets arrested. There's a whole process for that now, but what's important to y'all is that we have changed that. We now subscribe to almost everyone in the DPS RATBAC system, I think over 93% of licensees. So usually within a day or two of an arrest, someone in my office gets an electronic notification. I have them generate a report. We have to track that through disposition because it could impact that person's license. Some licensees who get arrested can continue to work until their case is resolved. And the way that we're gathering those now gives us a whole lot more insight because we're able to gather data. So for example, I could see how many officers last year got arrested for DWI or how many got arrested for family violence. We have the potential to create hotspot maps or to look at how many of those officers have been appointed 10 years or more, 20 years or more, and look for other patterns. This is information that we didn't have available to us before. We were working on spreadsheets and putting things in paper folders, but now that we have digital information, I think we have a lot more information available to us, not just on problems in one agency or one group, but all across the state. If an officer gets arrested, and I'll use DWI as the example generally because we see a lot of those. An officer gets arrested for DWI. If his case gets dismissed outright, or if he gets a pretrial diversion, then he's generally going to survive that. That's not going to impact their license. However, if they get deferred adjudication or they get a conviction, then it will almost certainly result in license action. And the reason I'm telling you that is because the process is important. An officer gets arrested for DWI. Some of them are allowed to work, some of them are put on restricted duty, and then some of them are terminated. But they go through the whole process. If they get deferred adjudication, then they go through a period of probation. And towards the end of that probation, a lot of times they will come to us. We will send them a notification that we intend to suspend their license for, say, 10 years. And then they have the ability to ask for what's called an informal hearing, and a lot of them do that. And so we have video meetings with them. And they can explain the circumstances of their arrest and ask for us to change the punishment. We have a panel that hears that and makes a recommendation to the executive director, and then he can choose to make an offer to the licensee. So he might say, instead of a 10-year suspension, I'll offer you a 5-year suspension and 5 years probated. The licensee can either accept that punishment or they can go to the State Office of Administrative Hearings and argue it there. But it's in these informal hearings that I hear over and over. I hear the people that I work with, right? I know that the reason they got arrested is because they reached the point of crisis, that nobody helped them or they didn't see the opportunity before that. And it's so late in the game, not to say we can't help them. And Chief Deputy and I had this conversation yesterday. Even if they lose their license and lose their job, but they get sober and they stay alive, but that is a victory to me, right? I don't want everyone to think that my goal here is that everybody can go right back to work. Some of these people should never go back to work in law enforcement, right? That might be what's best for them. But I want to make sure that we're doing what we can to help them.
And TJ, if I may, real quick.
Yes, sir.
A note on the informal process. I think this may give us an opportunity with
the expertise that TCOL has in front of us. And now as we go through the course of this advisory committee to maybe bring some of the processes that we're doing in these informal conference to you all and get some feed forward to see if we can improve that and how we can get that up to the times. We've had that in place probably for 10 or 12 years now, and we've certainly adjusted as we went along, but we're always looking to improve it. So just maybe talk to the chair and the co-chair and sneak it in on the agenda on one of these future meetings.
You're like 2 slides ahead of me. We are gonna kind of. So the content of the informal hearing, some of them appear with counsel, some of them without. A lot of times they explain the circumstances of the arrest. They tell us the story from their perspective, what happened. Sometimes they leave out important details. I've actually had them. Have you watched the video? Have you seen the things you said to those officers? Like, no, I haven't watched it. I don't want to watch it. Like, you probably should watch it. Sometimes they describe how they successfully completed the terms of their probation. That's usually what they want me to use as a measure of success, right? I made it through probation. I didn't get arrested again. They almost always talk about wanting to return to law enforcement, but they rarely discuss the underlying causes of the offense, the alcohol abuse, the anger management, how it is that they end up getting arrested. They even more rarely discuss how they tried to address that, right? Sometimes they do. Sometimes they talk about getting treatment or getting counseling and that they understand where they failed before and how they can prevent that. Some of them have had SASE evaluations. Usually that's because probation required them to. I don't think I've seen anybody who did that on their own. But that's something that in my conversations with counselors and people in the industry, I understand the importance of them finding out, what it is that they need to do.
TJ, would you tell the group, some of the group may not be familiar with SASE or?
So that is a substance abuse evaluation. There's probably people in this room that can explain a lot better than I can, but it's intended to help you determine the level of your problem, right? If they're binge drinking, if they need treatment, if they need outpatient or inpatient treatment, right?
Yeah.
And my understanding, and everybody I've talked to, is that it's a pretty hard test to fake, right?
It's more in depth than just a general, questionnaire. It's really in depth. They actually use that when you get your driver's license suspended to be able to go to the committee to get it back. So it's a very in-depth test.
And when they're on probation, they tell us they had that. We always ask, would you be willing to provide us a copy?
Yep.
Because I think that's something important for us to look at in evaluating. So, and hearing that same pattern over and over, that's where I felt like we have a real opportunity. We know someone's in crisis. We should be intervening far earlier. Should we be communicating them immediately following arrest? Can we tell them things that they could be doing in an effort to preserve their license if they wanted to, right? What the process is going to be on the criminal side, what the process will be on our side as far as licensure, and what things could you do so when you appear in an informal hearing later, you could tell me that you got an evaluation, that you engaged in counseling, that you did these things, that you've identified some of the root causes, and that you are now aware of how to avoid that situation in the future. So one of the ones we had, he talked about, actually this story is important for 2 reasons. He was at a relatively small agency. He was a task force officer. We worked on a federal task force. He got a DWI, and he said his parents lived in a second house on the same property. His adult kids had moved back in. He was working overtime every week under the federal grant funding. He said, I got spread too thin, too fast. Like I took on too much, and that's why I got the DWI. Well, he said the mayor said, we can't have an officer get arrested and not do anything, so we got to do something. So they put him on a performance improvement plan for 90 days. In the 90 days, he couldn't get arrested again. That was a performance improvement plan. To me, that's embarrassing. That's the support that he got from his agency, right? And then he talked about the counseling and how he'd found balance now, but everything we talked about, how do you deal with this? It was, I call my counselor. So it's like, okay, well, whatever probated term we give you, we're going to require you to keep going to counseling throughout that probation. If that's the coping mechanism you've developed, you need to continue that. So that's one of the things. Can we do more with probated suspensions? John and I have conversations. Can we provide resource guides or web pages like you talked about? Can we add to the training for chief administrators? Chiefs are all required to go to certain training. Is there something we can add to that will help spread the word or connect people to resources? And we also have the ability to require training for all licensees through the TCOL training. And so we're developing probably a 2 or 3 hour block for the next training unit that'll have to do with a lot of stuff on TCOL, but it's another opportunity where we can touch licensees. Another example that stood out to me in some of my conversations with counselors is a lot of guys are required to go to AA, and I apologize for saying guys because it's not all guys, but a lot of licensees are required to go to AA as a condition of their probation, for example, DWI cases. And the feedback that I've gotten is for them to go to a group of strangers and participate in AA, especially this group, is not always as successful. An online group of true peers would be far more productive, right, if they can go to a group of other peace officers in similar situations. So I just don't, if we knew of where that was available and from the start, when somebody gets arrested, we could provide them that resource or the availability of it. Even if they don't choose to engage it at that time, if they're required to through probation later, they may go back to that and use that. Again, we see the group early on, and these are in agencies where they may be getting no other support, where they may just be put on a performance improvement plan to not get arrested again. That's all the support they get. So just a letter that explains that might be really valuable to them. I'm going to touch very briefly on this, emergency license suspensions. This is a new authority given to TCOL, but I think it will be used very rarely. Most of the time when a licensee is suicidal or when they're in crisis and the agency becomes aware that that is the chief administrator's responsibility. We're going to talk a little bit about fit for duty examinations later, and that's where that comes in. We have the ability to get involved. I think most of the time this would be a chief administrator. So even a sheriff or a constable, if we took action against their license, they still have the responsibilities of their office. They would still be able to act in that capacity. If there's a 1 or 2 person agency where the chief of police is suicidal and the city calls us for help, we could suspend their license if they didn't want to remove them from office, and we could address that. But those circumstances are very rare. Most of the time when officers are suicidal, that's going to be dealt with at the agency level. So the licensees that get arrested, I think, are almost always at the crisis point, right? And in those conversations with the ones that are honest, they recognize that. What I want to talk about is that we have visibility to a lot of officers before they get to that point. And so for some of you that worked for larger agencies where you have early warning systems, there are more and more agencies that track use of force, the number of sick days you've used, collisions you've been involved in, like they look at a whole bunch of stuff and they identify people who might be at risk. When I was a robbery sergeant, one of my investigators had 3 use of force incidents in 6 months. Well, detectives shouldn't do that, right? I looked into it. Every weekend he was working overtime with his old shift on walk and beat downtown, and so all those incidents were when he was in, dealing with bar fights in his off-duty job. It wasn't that he was beating people in the interview room and then, writing it up in reports. But that's how the system is supposed to work. It's supposed to flag that for that person in that position, there's data that indicates there might be a problem. We are getting far more information than we were in the past, and we're going to continue to get more and more information. So as the chief deputy referred to, the fit for duty process, that has always existed. Chief administrators have had that authority to order their employees to go get an evaluation, either medical or psychological, if there are certain indicators. We created model policies for all the agencies, so the process is more uniform across the state. There's a better understanding of how that's supposed to work. You should have a copy of the form on your desk. You've got both the L2, the L3, which are the medical and psychological exam. Those are generally for applicants that are in the process. The fit for duty is a whole different process. That is what a chief administrator would order a licensee working for them to go do. So that is supposed to be reported to us. If a licensee fails and the chief sends them to get evaluated, they go get examined, and they pass, there's no problem. If they fail and the doctor recommends treatment and they engage in that treatment, TCOL doesn't have to be notified. If they separate from the agency and they never resolve the issue, then we have to be notified because we're gonna make sure the next agency knows before they can hire him, with the example that you gave. Or if they refuse to get treatment or if they refuse to get evaluated. We have seen agencies reporting to us now on these where they sent them and they failed, but they're engaging in treatment. So we create an information report, but we don't take license action against those, right? It's our hope that they can resolve it at the agency level. That process recommends that they go to their own doctor first. And the reason the committee recommended that is because we think they're most likely to listen to their own doctor. If it's the agency's doctor they got sent to, there's gonna be that level of distrust. But if your own doctor tells you need to go to treatment, they're more likely to engage. So that process is definitely improved. We are starting to get more and more reports, and we have seen people who separate from the agency, either they refuse treatment or they don't complete treatment, and then they complain about having to get a new evaluation and letting the new agency know. But the days of the new agency claiming they didn't know, those are essentially gone. We document it, we put a hold on that person's license, and before they can go to a new agency, we require them to get reevaluated and establish that the previous problem is not a continuing problem. So the applicant failures on the fit for duties, these are harder to project because they don't have to report them all to us, but I'm guessing we'll see probably 100 a year of these where they fail and leave an agency. It may be more than that. The failed applicants, those are far higher numbers. I think there'll be more than 2,000 a year we get. So a lot of these are people who have applied for a temporary jailer or temporary telecommunicator. They've applied to enter a police academy and they failed. But some of them are someone who's working in an agency, wants to go to another agency, and they have to get an evaluation there. So they fail at the agency where they're applying, and now we've got to notify the agency where they're currently appointed. And there's a little bit of a mess to untangle there. The good news is, again, we had applicants who stopped disclosing their combat tours, they stopped disclosing their PTSD diagnosis with the VA, they stopped disclosing all this stuff when they go to the doctor interviews, and they were eventually finding an agency that would hire them and a doctor that would let them through. Now, when, and I'm gonna use Dr. Smith as an example because I've worked with you so much, but if Dr. Smith fails someone and I get the packet, I not only get the failed form from him, I get the personal history statement, the background investigation he reviewed, and then his report, whatever other documents he reviewed, and I put them in a package. And so if he goes somewhere else, then I send all of that to the next doctor, the next agency, so they can review all that beforehand and make a far more informed decision, knowing not just that he failed them, but the context of that decision and what his findings were. That has been really helpful. So we still have people who pass. We have people who fail because they spent 12 years in the military and this doctor thinks they're too rigid in their decision making and may have trouble with authority. Then I have a sheriff from North Texas call me. He's got a 6-man agency and his doctor thinks they'll be a great fit. They go get evaluated. They read the other doctor's reports. They understand their concerns. But in this particular application with these job duties and description, I think they'll be fine. So it doesn't prevent people from getting hired. However, the ones who are lying and concealing stuff or have pretty serious mental health issues, it's much harder for them to conceal that and for the doctor to not be aware.
And TJ, wouldn't this, the new process, and Dr. Smith, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think before the other committee previously, there was an issue because that applicant that might fail here went to another part of Texas, saw another psychologist, maybe didn't have privy to all the information and passed psychological somewhere else, like in the instance I had, because I'm assuming that the psychologist that approved that employee probably didn't have all of the information the first one had.
Correct, and if I may, so
Please.
there was a lot of things going on with the L3s, okay? So one of the things, first of all, I would like to say this, not all psychologists are trained to do these or have the same background. So sometimes, and one of the critical things to understand about pre-employments is this is not about diagnosing somebody with mental illness, right? And so the standard for diagnosing somebody with mental illness is very high, right? And so, and on that basis, everyone passes because very few people actually come in with a psychiatric diagnosis. Now, there are some with PTSD, but the question then becomes how active is it, how well treated is it, that kind of thing. But an L3 is more about mental wellness, and there's some national guidelines that we follow to look at things like not only emotional regulation, but integrity, their impulse control, their judgment, decision-making skills, their social skills, their ability to de-escalate, and among others. And so we look at all those things, and when I do these assessments, what I'm looking to do is to try to do it in a rigorous but also a very consistent way. We ask everyone the same set of questions. We provide everybody the same opportunities. But what was happening before was that many officers were going to a typical psychologist who would look at them from a perspective of, do you have something diagnosable? And if you don't, then you're fine. You're good. And they signed the form. The other thing that would happen is that they would, and we still get this to this day, many people kind of confuse and think that once they come and see me, they have access to their records and to their L3 form, right? And so often they'll go to some psychologist and get them to sign off on it, and then they'll just shop that around, have L3 will travel. Present that to any agency and they'll just accept it. We've had other psychologists that if you failed and you wanted to pay a little extra money, they'll let you retake their tests, and if you could game the test to pass it, they would sign your form. There's just a long laundry list of things that were going on, and this whole process with Chief Vineyard has really tightened that process up a lot.
Does TCOL have the ability, and maybe they don't, by rule or by statute, to use psychologists that are trained the right way. When we had our employee in crisis, I had those 2 reports, those 2 evaluations within 30 days of each other. Of course, I didn't see the other one, but I know she had an improved L3 because they went to work for another agency. But very stark differences, and it made me wonder, were the psychologists evaluating them on different planes? Did the second one not have all the information of the first one? And when I called DPS to look for a psychologist, she mentioned, as you just did, that there are some psychologists trained specifically pre-employment for public safety. And with that special training or designation, does TCOL by rule or statute have the ability to tell agencies in a certain situation, these are the psychologists you need to use? I don't. And that may be a rock we don't want to overturn. I don't know. It just.
So potentially we could, right? But the problem we have right now is we can't find enough qualified doctors, especially in some remote parts of the state, for what people have to deal with. What he's talking about are problems that were even a year ago that we have made steps forward. So one of the big problems is the rule requires you to do certain things. The doctor's supposed to get your personal history statement. They're supposed to get your background. Well, I have one where he brought in his own PHS, and it was very different than the one he gave the agency. He then gave another doctor his personal email, or a made-up email as the sheriff's email, because he knew it was going to get failed, and he wanted to get the report, not the sheriff. Right? So we have people like that. The rule requires you to get all those things that's now on the form. And I immediately had doctors calling me, well, I can't do all this stuff. Well, you're supposed to have been doing it for the last 20 years. It's in the rule. That's why I put it on the form. If you're going to sign your name, you can't claim you didn't know that, right? We're making progress. It's the same thing. The agency should pick the doctor, not the applicant, right? That's now on the form. We're making that clear to the agencies. So we're making big progress there. So again, we haven't solved the problem, but we're definitely moving forward in those areas and improving that situation. I think more and more of the doctors are becoming uncomfortable now because they know that we're going to be keeping up and tracking these. So it is falling more to the specialized doctors who have the experience to do this and have a standard that they're operating by.
And it may come through some of the administrator or chiefs training, where when we talk about 60% of these agencies or 75% having less than 25 officers, I don't think a lot of our administrators or chiefs are putting any thought in. They feel like if they send them to a psychologist, they're sending them to a psychologist. They don't even understand the need for the special.
And we have a meeting, in fact, next week with the people from Lehman, and some of this will be part of our discussion for the next cycle of training. And of course, they train constables and they train police chiefs. We'll reach that out also to the Sheriff's Association to incorporate that into their training. The dichotomy is someone may not have a diagnosed mental illness, but may still not be fit to serve as a police officer. Those are 2 different things. To get that, we want to make sure that we incorporate that into the training for agency.
One of the things I've seen on jailers failing is that they just don't have sufficient IQ. Like they can be tricked very easily. Like they're not smart enough to be in this position of trust, right? That had never occurred to me that a doctor would fail, but if they didn't at the agency level, when it gets to the doctor, I think that you have a responsibility to point that out.
Yeah, it's difficult. And sometimes it has to do with, when somebody has no life or work experience and their first job is get to come in and be a jailer. Some of these folks don't have the problem solving or life experience to be able to manage that kind of environment. And many people also show integrity. One thing I wanted to add to the discussion is, some people would make this case, opinions are just opinions. They're all equally, but they're not. There's informed opinions and there's uninformed opinions. And so this sharing of information, so if I have a psychologist who sends me their report when it failed them, it's going to be a high bar for me to go, yeah, none of this matters, right? But what happens is if you think about game theory, if you create a situation where everybody gets to see a bunch of psychologists, I can guarantee you somebody's going to pass them every time. And but if you're sharing that information, I as a psychologist have to look at that and say there's absolutely nothing there. If you repeat psychological testing over and over again, or even an interview, they change their answers and until they pass. And so there are problems with repeat evals, and you have to take that into account. And I think the way to overcome that, at least in the short term, is to share that information. But thinking about training of the psychologists themselves is also something should be considered.
And to the conversation we had yesterday, our visibility and our data gathering is gonna move us that direction naturally. I'm gonna start reaching out to the large agencies that I haven't got any failure reports from. Some of those are because they didn't know, and they're gonna send me all the ones that they've had. Some of it's because their doctor hasn't failed a single person in 3 months, right? And then that may be where the chief administrator has questions about, well, hang on, everybody else has failures, why is my doctor not failing anybody?
That was gonna be my next question to Dr. Smith, and I don't know whether this number exists or whether this is even feasible, but with the number of, I mean, obviously you're doing a lot of evaluations, but with the number of evaluations you're doing, is there an average failure rate in the profession?
So the range runs somewhere around 10 to 13% in that range. I'll be honest with you, if there is an agency I work with that is very picky, does extensive kind of old-fashioned backgrounds where they go and they come to your house, they talk to your neighbors, you know. They're picky. I mean, really picky, and these people are squeaky clean. And I haven't failed not one of their candidates. I mean, and because there's nothing, no justification, right? But the looser the background process is, the more desperate for people, then you're gonna have a higher failure rate. It's
That's interesting. Well, and the reason I asked that question is from an administrative standpoint, if you were an agency administrator and you were sitting around, you know, I've done 1,000 psychological evals in the last 2 years and nobody's failed. Does that throw up a red flag?
Because there's a statistical number, I think.
Yeah.
You know,
Right, so I wasn't trying to put a hard number on it, but on average, wait a minute, I'm not getting any. Maybe I need to have a conversation with my psychologist. Am I using the right one? Because there's some liability attached to that agency, right? As an administrator, if my psychologist is 100% not giving me any failures, then maybe I need to look into that and try to prevent myself, the agency, from some problems going forward. And that might could be in the administrator training where, hey, to your administrators, if you're getting a 1% or a 0% failure rate, then that's not average.
Right, one last point I would make to you all is that there are two types of errors. There's no way to get rid of them in these assessments. If you're very stringent, you're gonna disqualify people that really should be hired, right? If you're too loose, you're going to basically hire a bunch of people that are gonna be potential problems. Psychologists in this role are risk managers, and so you have to balance the agency's need for personnel versus quality and quantity. And you know, that's a very, I can tell you from my standpoint, it's a difficult thing to achieve, right? We track it very carefully. We prove that there's no adverse impact against any protected class. We do the best that we can under the circumstances, but I think that, you know, understanding that process and understanding the limits that psychologists have is important as well.
Again, just for context, so everybody understands, in order to get enrolled in the academy or to initially get licensed, you have to go through a medical and a psychological examination. Doctors have to sign off on those. The medical examination is whether you can do the job duties and responsibilities of that particular job. The medical exam also involves a drug screen, right? And you have to pass a drug screen. So if you leave an agency, go to another agency, if your separation of service is less than 180 days, you don't have to get reevaluated. A lot of police departments, I think most of the big agencies now require you to do it regardless. That's something that our advisory committees recommended, is that we do away with 180 days, and I think eventually we'll get there, is anytime you're applying for a new appointment, you're gonna have to get both the medical and psychological. But right now, there is a way for someone who got one in 1983 to keep going agency to agency, and as long as they maintain those appointments, never have to get evaluated again. Failed drug screen, so now we have a lot of agencies that do random UAs. If you get involved in a collision, you have to do one. So one of the big agencies has people, they fail a UA, they terminate them, and then they separate them. So now that's something you need to require of me. I'm gonna put a hold on them. The next agency, I'm gonna make sure that they're clear on it, that they get a new clean drug screen, even if it's less than 180 days, before that person can go to work. Again, my goal is to help chief administrators make more informed hiring decisions, and that they don't have the excuse of I didn't know anymore. And if the agency doesn't tell them, I'm going to tell them. And this idea of us getting a lot more information, some of the new legislative changes are gonna require agencies to notify us of all misconduct investigations. So we may get that in real time from some agencies. It may only be after the employee separates, but at a minimum, we'll be able to see how many sustained allegations each licensee has had at some point in their career. I don't think that the information itself is gonna be directly useful. It is to the next agency in the hiring decision, but again, in the idea of an early warning system, right? That we see someone who's moved to 3 different agencies in 5 years, they've had misconduct at each of those places, right? That we're starting to see a pattern, and is there a lack of support in those agencies where we can help connect those, that particular licensee to resources? We get what we call non-jurisdictional complaints, so people call me all the time to tell me that this officer was rude to them in Tyler, Texas. I can't do anything about that. I can tell them what they can do. We document a lot of those. We're gonna deal more and more as agencies have the requirement to investigate all allegations of misconduct. We may refer some of those back to the agencies, but again, it's information we see on particular licensees. We do our own misconduct investigations against, we have a very narrow scope of jurisdiction, but we do investigate them. We also see patterns in training compliance. There are some people who always wait till the very end of each training cycle and do the minimum amount of training, whereas other officers in that same peer group are engaging in a lot more training. That could, again, be an indicator. And then we're always asked to deal with the problem of wandering officers that move agency to agency. That in itself is not a problem. In some of those cases, it's because they're trying to avoid agencies that aren't following the rules, right? But for most of them, it is an indication of a problem. We're getting more and more data available that we can look at and better understand that problem. And then, as Chief and I talked about yesterday, I don't want to just talk about licensees because we have visibility at the agency level as well, right? So the death of a licensee at a 10-person agency is going to have a far different effect than the death of an officer at the Austin Police Department. Both of them are huge incidents, but the way the agency deals with it, the resources they have available are very different. We had the conversation about your agency and finding outside peer support that you didn't even know existed until you got there. But again, you're a very large agency. You're not just a large agency, you're very large comparatively. So there are a lot that don't have that. We can see the agencies that have a high turnover rate at the chief administrator position, a high turnover rate among licensees, and we expect in the near future to have agencies projecting their staffing numbers for the next year to us, so we'll be able to see those that are dramatically understaffed. Again, Austin Police Department is 15% below their projected staffing. They have better resources to deal with it than a 10-man agency that is 2 people down. That may require everyone to work more. We have a lot of existing resources that we can talk about, and again, I don't think our goal is to come up with new programs or new resources. It's just take the information, the things that we see, and find better ways to share that with agencies and licensees, better ways to communicate with them, ways to make the tools more directly available. The last example I want to give is we recently changed our login now. When you log in, if you use TCLEDS or MyTCOL or different tools that we have available, there's one login on our website where you go in. Well, we have a rule book, and most licensees aren't aware of that. Part of the reason that we did the model policies was so it would be in their own policy manual, they would be able to see it at home. But I asked that we put our rule book up there with MyTCOL and TCLEDS, and that's a tool that they should all see when they log in, a tool that's available to them. And that's what I think a lot of these things are, is it's just more tools that we can make available to agencies and to licensees, particularly those that we see are involved in high-risk patterns. That's all I have. Do you want to take a quick break?
Yeah, that's what I was just fixing to say. It's 10:10. Why don't we take a 10-minute break and just then come back? If we look at the agenda, if y'all got the agenda, Tico pulled out. I know it's kind of a generic agenda we put together for the first meeting, but I felt like there we are. I felt like we're about on item 2. We may have spilled over into 3 actually. Is about where we are on that committee, but where I would like to go the rest of the day, and I'll entertain some comments, is I'd like to have a discussion about what committees, those 2 or 3 committees we ought to establish to work on to come up with that. And in my mind, before our discussion today and the presentation with TJ, I viewed one of the committees looking at what TCOL does when that licensee is arrested or fails something, how can we help there? And then another committee looking into the resource guides. I guess it could be 2 or 3 committees when we look into the resource or the link that goes on the TCOL website for an administrator or an officer or an FTO or somebody looking for help, what does that resource look like? And, TJ, I'd ask your thought on this too. As we went through that about early warning, what about these agencies that don't have an early warning system? Could there be a sample guide for this is what you look for in your agency? Is there an early warning system? Could we provide some guidance to an agency administrator and what to look for in their agency in an early warning system?
So we're all about communication and education, right? I'm over enforcement, but I push for better communication and education. Most of the people I see that don't follow the rules is because they don't know, or it's rarely because they're trying to get around the rules. We have very small percentages in that group. So yes, we have chief administrator desk references, we have training coordinator desk references, we have our website, like we have all these things out there. And so if there's information that we can make available, one of the things that we've talked about developing now is some kind of manual for those people who hire chief administrators, right? Mayors, superintendents, city managers, those types of people. And so the more places that we can put that stuff, a chief may come take over a 50-person agency and not know about that, but if his city manager has read about that and says one of the things I want to do is implement an early warning system, then again, we've accomplished that goal. So if there are tools that you identify that you think are underutilized and we can help communicate and educate on that, then we can certainly make that part of our package.
And we'll just take the committees one by one, because I do feel like we'll take a vote and do that formally as a committee and form those committees. So in discussion about the first committee that would look into the process of the licensee that got arrested in the process in which TCOLE goes through, is there any comments or discussions about how that committee, I'm not looking, I don't think we're looking to tell TCOLE, hey, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel for TCOLE. We're looking at the process they currently use, and is there a way to better serve the licensee or the agency in that role, if that makes sense?
And I'll agree to be involved with that group just to kind of help with the framework of what we do, right? So where those opportunities are in that framework. So
Daniel or Jenny, just so I don't get too far out of bounds, how many people can be on those committees and we don't have a quorum issue? What's our total number?
Mr. Chair, on those subcommittees, the key thing to remember, you can have them as large or as small, but practically speaking, probably if it gets too big, you just basically have another committee. You can have the subcommittees and stay under the Open Meetings Act. What they'll do is report to you all as a larger committee for further consideration by the larger committee.
Okay.
You can have them any size you want to, but that's certainly.
Okay, I was worried about forming a quorum or something crazy.
No, sir, that resides with this main committee here. The key is, the subcommittees bring back reports to you all as the larger committee, and you all deliberate and make decisions on their recommendations or whatever's been assigned to them.
Perfect. So on this first committee, looking into those, we can define that language. Does anybody have a particular interest in, TJ can help guide that group?
I'd like to serve on that.
Okay.
I'm interested in that one too.
Okay. I'm gonna jot that down. And who's our note taker helping us? Have you got those names for that first? Dr. Kevin Smith.
Teresa Jamerson.
Jeff Barnett.
And to define that purpose in the form of a motion, I guess that would be the best way to form that.
You could either, I will say this, you've already got the volunteers for it. You really don't necessarily need a motion, a second, or discussion about it. You can assign it out as chair.
Okay. Let's discuss a little bit the language of that committee and just evaluating the process that they use when a licensee is reported and how that goes, and is there a place for some. I see Dr. Smith, I see a role, we need 3 of you on this committee. I see that going a different direction. Does anybody have any other comments about that particular committee or what they could look at and what they think they need to do, or if that works well? All right, well, if we don't need a motion, I'll just, as the chair, make that assignment, and that will be our committee number one that's gonna look into the licensing issues when a licensee is reported to TCOLE through an arrest or a crisis, or I guess that could even be a fit for duty evaluation. If somebody, wouldn't that fall into that same category, TJ? If an agency sent a licensee for a fit for duty evaluation and they failed that evaluation.
So again, I'm gonna encourage that we kind of stay narrow and generate some stuff, and then we can go broader. So we have communication opportunities every time someone fails a medical, every time someone fails a psychological, every time they fail a fit for duty, right? We could communicate with that. But I think if we focus on this E1 process first and kind of develop something, then it may lend itself to, let's take this piece of it for a different problem.
And then our second committee I view as a little more early prevention, maybe a self-reporting. I know Captain Sunley was interested in that group and the line officer, so I don't know how many are left, but if.
I'll be interested in that one also.
Okay. So maybe that group, and TJ, are you wanting to be the lead on that, or do you want on that first committee, or do you want me to designate one of the group to work with you? Dr. Smith, would you mind being the lead on that group and working with TJ and being the communication lead on the first group? Well, if you are, that.
It depends on the time commitment, I'll be honest with you.
Okay, if you'll, Teresa, that'd be great. She can be the lead and kind of and I just wanted somebody to be on that committee to be able to, after we leave, get their contact information and just establish an email or a communication. And if y'all could have a virtual meeting, I guess it's okay for that committee to have a virtual meeting, or?
Again, it's a subcommittee, they can talk amongst themselves. The key point, bringing back their findings to the larger committee. That's for further deliberation. As long as the larger committee is making the deliberation and decision on whatever they bring, they can meet however they wish.
Great, well, if you take the lead on that one and organize that group to look into those processes. Captain, you be the lead on the second committee, if that's okay. That committee's gonna look into the early warning, the link TCOLE could put on their website, what kind of resources that group puts together. And I guess to TJ's advice, I'm quick to get too broad because I've got several notes written down here, sitting down here, because I view that committee from an agency perspective, because there's gonna be agency administrators coming to it saying, what can I do for my agency? I've had an employee come self-report, or I've got a fit for duty issue. What resources do I have as an agency? And then I view it also from an officer standpoint, where, yes, sir.
Would it help to talk about the work product like we talked about yesterday? So the other committees, they will generate, so for example, the one that's working on training coordinator minimum requirements. Right now, you could be appointed as a training coordinator over at Academy, even if you're under indictment for 3 felonies, right? So they may create a rule that creates a minimum standard, and then they will present that to the commissioners. The commissioners will vote on whether or not that will become a rule, and will go in our rule book. This group is very different in what they're producing. We have a meeting in March, which we have a work day with them before the meeting, and so I'll have a chance to have some interaction with the commissioners and talk about what this group is working on to make sure we're going in the direction they expect. But having a work product in May and then the meeting in June when you present something, it could only be 1 or 2 of these things. It could be like a resource guide that we want to put on the website, and it could be recommendations for communications with people who get arrested and send us an E1. And it may be that simple, but I certainly think that if the group has other things they want to do or other subcommittees that are working, that you can let the commissioners know and that you want to come back in 6 months and make additional recommendations and plan on meeting once a month. I don't think anyone's going to stop this group from making progress if there's additional work to be done. So don't feel like we got to get everything done by May or everything that we think we can accomplish. I think the more important thing is to have a couple of focused steps forward where we can show them the progress we've made, and then the things that you want to continue to look at, and they would probably continue.
My closing remark that I have written down here was to use the June meeting as a goal to be able to come back to y'all and to the commission and report on these 2 projects about what we've done and make a decision at that time whether this needed. We may get to a point where we say this is our recommendations and this is the recommendations of this committee, and we leave it in June with those recommendations. If we kick over a rock and have a rabbit hole that somebody's running down, maybe there's a project that a group stays and continues to work on.
That's great. And to reiterate what TJ said, the March commission meeting was a great opportunity for them for a look in to see where this advisory committee is headed and kind of get some back and forth, and so we can come back and give further direction to you all.
Does the committee need, is the commission, are y'all looking for the committees to make a report at that commission meeting in March? Is that?
No, as a liaison, I can just kind of brief them on the
Sure, okay.
subcommittees and the progress of the group, right? What it is they're talking about.
And we'll discuss here after the committees are formed, we'll make sure you've got all the information for the committees, but one of the final steps will be to discuss our future meetings and how we do that. Let's just start over here. And Captain Suddenly will kind of coordinate that.
I think you got me, right? You got me?
Yes.
Joseph.
Any other discussion about those two committees or questions? Teresa, your captain, have anything about, any questions about that or?
No, not right now, but just looking to see when we could just pass out email and make a first meeting.
And I'll make sure, I know Gretchen sent me the contact list and I may have included it, you may?
Yep, I have.
Okay, so we'll have that, I don't know if cell phones or, all contact phone numbers are on there, I'll have to go back and look.
Yeah, there's phone numbers and email address.
Okay, so we've got those contact lists, yes, sir.
Teresa made a really good point during the break, and I want to bring it up for the resource guide group, is that we fall into the trap of thinking this is for licensees and for agencies and chief administrators, but we should also recognize that for family members and friends of officers, right, that they are just as likely in a search to find that and be able to connect the licensee there. So we need to make sure that we structure it where it makes sense in all those contexts.
I think that we'll be able to have a work product after the first meeting as far as a initial guide. Just resources that we currently use now and have, that are identified and widely used.
When we talk about future meetings, I was thinking once a month. Does anybody feel differently, or I feel like if we meet once a month, the committees can do some work, and I'm happy to work with. If y'all set up a virtual meeting, I'm happy to join either group and participate with either group and help where I can. If we're sitting at if we looked at mid-February, does Thursdays or Fridays work best for everybody? Do Thursdays work okay for the group? Is Thursdays? My schedule doesn't always accommodate everybody else's, but Thursdays lets me get some of the week out of the way and focus on that. Would February the 21st be okay to tentatively plan our next one?
20th, you mean?
Or 20th, I'm sorry, yes.
Yes, sir.
That would work for me.
Depends on where it will be.
I'd like to have the meetings here.
Oh.
Now, we had discussed doing virtual options if somebody needed to join virtually, and Gretchen left, but as I understand it, we can put that in the meeting announcement and we can have virtual meetings here as well.
That's correct. What we'll need to make sure before the posting deadline that if there's anyone appearing virtually, that we have the heads up so we can make the post indicate that there will be members appearing virtually. As long as the person who is presiding over the meeting, it is open to the public, then we can have members appear virtually.
And as I understand it, I think the members have to keep their microphone on and be visible. You can't block out your screen and all that.
That's correct. They'll need to be able to be seen and heard the entire time, particularly deliberations.
And I'll be honest, some of this is for my simplicity, but I plan on being here for all of the meetings for anybody that can join, and I would encourage the group to come if you're able to travel. Cause I plan on being here and taking advantages of your hospitality and technology and, make it easy on the group that's taking notes. And so we'll be here for the meetings. And, if for some reason you can't, Doctor, if you're tied up and need to join virtually, that's great. We'll make that an option. So we'll tentatively make or not tentatively, we'll plan on February the 20th as our next meeting at 9:00 in the morning. We'll start at 9 and we can schedule 3 hours, but hopefully we'll be like today and we'll get through this. So between now and February the 20th, the committees would just try to plan one little work group and we'll circle back on the 20th and go through those and discuss those.
Mr. Chair, we'll send the language to you and the APO regarding virtual attendance we'll go ahead and put that in the notice in case that's the direction we need to go.
Okay. That gets us through number 4 on the agenda about our future meeting dates and locations and including video conferencing. And public comment, I don't know, do we have any?
I'm public, I don't have much to say.
Okay, yes, sir. Well, thank you.
I just commend you on the work you're doing. So I'm Dr. Thomas McNeese, I'm a psychologist, and I'm also Director of the Behavioral Health Division at Harris County Sheriff's Office. We've been there since 2020. We're an embedded mental health resource within the agency. Do a lot of good stuff, including working with Dr. Smith, which is why I'm here. We are entering our 3rd year of collaborating with Baylor College of Medicine, doing a pre-doctoral fellowship for people in their doctoral program at the end of their psychology doctoral program, which is a great pipeline to get new psychologists into the field. There's a resource if y'all need anything.
Well, thank you for coming and thank you for your comments. I appreciate you being here. Is there anybody else from the public? Yes, ma'am.
My name is Jackie Football, and I'm here in support of Teresa Jamerson. I heard about you guys through the Texas Probation Association because I'm a member. And I just want to tell you thank you, and if there's anything that we could do to keep contributing, because we believe in inner peace and happier life, and we also feel that you don't have to talk about, we want to stop the stigma and save lives. And so that's one of our biggest things. So we are in the community, we want to have our forums, we want to talk about it, and so if there's anything that we can do to help, here.
Thank you for being here and thank you for your comments. Thank you for your support. Any others? No other public comment. Before we close, is there any closing remarks or anything we need to cover that we haven't? Or?
Only other thing that I can't believe didn't come up, and I don't know what she said that made me think of it, but in all these changes that we've had with the failures in the medical and the psychological and putting holds on people and requiring reevaluation, this is a tedious process, right? That's part of the reason I work with Dr. Smith so much is because of the volume of people they're dealing with, the number of scenarios they've dealt with, and how are we going to resolve this particular scenario. What I have been surprised by is there has never been pushback from anybody. Right, is that I'm making the processes more difficult for chief administrators, but they all understand this. We need to do this a long time ago, right? That we're protecting the profession, we're protecting the officers. It's like in police academies. We have some academies where you're not doing them any favors by letting them through. This is not the profession for them. They're showing you that in the way that they act in the academy. And so this stuff is the awareness is growing, the importance is growing, and I know that everybody wants to hire people, but this is an area where people aren't willing to make compromises. And so I'm glad that it was here. I'm glad everyone's committed to working on it, but there is broader support than I expected. We get a lot of complaints about people making our life harder, and I can't believe you're doing this, and I can't believe you came up with this. Like, the legislators came up with it. We're the ones who's passing it on. But this is one where everybody understands.
Sure.
We have failed as a profession in some sense, and that we're making progress now and correcting some of those things. I'm glad y'all are helping with that.
I can see from being involved with PCIS, the younger officers that are coming through that are involved in shootings, they are so receptive to having mental health that they know, they understand they're involved in something and they don't want to have any of that bad shit develop. They want it gone, processed, and move on down the road.
So Teresa and I are talking about, I want it to be like the NFL where someone else pulls you out of the game, right? On the sideline for a little bit, you're gonna do something else. We have a local agency that now requires everybody to get a psychological evaluation once a year, or at least go see their doctor. And they said the first year, everybody freaked out. The second year, everybody's like, well, whatever. By the third year, they said they're looking forward to it because it's beneficial to talk to a doctor and there's no stigma attached because everybody has to do it. So I go have my meeting like everybody else does and they all embrace it now. So the industry is ready for change. I think that there are people who are ready for change and the things that you add will benefit the entire state. So we all want to have impact. That's why we got into this career. You can impact 400 people every day, Chief Deputy, but this is the potential to impact 100,000 people through what you're doing here.
John, anything closing from anything?
No, sir. Thank y'all again.
Director?
Same thing. I appreciate what you guys have agreed to do. It's time consuming. Your time is valuable. We appreciate that, and I'll just reiterate, it's important work. I go back to there's plenty of them throughout my career, military and law enforcement. The one friend of mine who ended up dying from alcoholism, his boy, his son, graduated the Lubbock Police Academy this last year. As an officer there now, I just happened to be in town and I went to his graduation, and it sort of dawned on me that we owe it to his generation of law enforcement to do better than we did before, because my friend group, my generation, we all knew that Byron had trouble and was solving his problems with alcohol, and we didn't do the things we should have done, that the agency didn't, and the friend group, we didn't. No one really knew how to respond to that back then, and we owe it to his son, who's following down his footsteps, to do better for this generation of law enforcement. So it's important work, and TJ's right, with the opportunity to impact more than 100,000 people. But I go beyond that. I think Texas can set the standard and can be the model for the rest of the nation to follow as we do good work in other states. When Nebraska is looking at it, or North Dakota, or whoever, they make a phone call to Texas and say, hey, we'd like to send someone out to look at what you're doing. So it's very important, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks. Daniel, Jenny from the legal.
I don't have anything else. Thank you all for being here. We really appreciate it.
Okay, great. Note taking, okay, anything we need to do?
They're great.
No, yeah, y'all are the rock stars. Y'all are saving our lives. So if there's anything we can do to make it better, thank you. Brian, anything?
Thank you for everybody that's on this committee, because there are, and you know it, or you know somebody that knows it, there are epic horror stories in the world of Texas law enforcement. There's agency of the 2,800, vast majority, they are not prepared for a critical incident in any way, shape, form, or fashion. It is horrible. When one of our licensees gets involved in an extremely violent fight, physical fight, not the one we wrote in the report was a fight, it was a fight. And there's a lot of blood. And he ends up having to do the ultimate thing. When that agency administrator has that person's spouse come to the scene to pick them up, covered in blood, to take them to the agency, that's when you know we have failed horribly. And it sucks, right? And even though I wish we could fix this tomorrow, it's gonna be a while. But absolutely thank you for what we're about to do and trying to do. There's bills that have already been filed at the legislature for this coming session to try to help add additional licensing counselors, not only in Texas, but surrounding states that could still come and practice to help with this cause. So thank you for what you do, and as always, stay safe.
Well, I'll close with this and then entertain a motion that we adjourn, but in the circles, in preparation for this committee, there was a lot of discussion. I think some of our administrators and some of our officers view TCOL as, and this is trying to turn into internal affairs. They're trying to be their own internal affairs, and I view it just the opposite. TCOL has been innovative, seeking opportunities to make licensees and agencies better, and I want that to be the message from the committee. It's been an innovative group, so I hope through the public comment and the public meetings that the public, our licensees and other agencies understand that this committee and TCOL is committed to some innovative changes that are gonna make our licensees and agencies better. And I hope that's what our subcommittee do, is we come out with a good resource guide that prevents situations, because I won't beat a dead horse, but it was frustrating to be in a 30-day period. That was a licensee that I felt like we could have intervened for some help. And that licensee had the ability to 2 days later go get another opinion from another psychologist and go work right down the street from us. And was later arrested. Just didn't have a good outcome. So hopefully we can put some play. There's already some things in place that I think prevent that particular situation in the future, which is great, and is an example of TCOL's innovation and ability to change. And so the committee's doing that. So thanks for being a part of it, and thank y'all for having us. Anything else? And if there's not, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second motion.
Make it or second it.
All in favor? We are officially adjourned.